Much of our Air Force heritage has been defined by our great airplanes, our historic conflicts, and our unforgettable heroes, whose legacies have been showcased in museums throughout the country. But there was no place that spotlighted the contributions of enlisted men and women to the development of air power until now, with the completion of the Air Force Enlisted Heritage Hall. Here at Gunter Air Force Base, Alabama, the job of designing a hall was given to Chief Master Sergeant Wayne Fisk.
Heritage Hall, when it was first conceived, was nothing more than an empty building. And through the self-help program initiated in the Senior NCO Academy, a small group of men and women were able to put this together. Unfortunately, much of our history has dropped through the cracks in the floor, and it will be irretrievable. Much of it, though, has been recorded in bits and pieces, and we've been able to bring those pieces together and assemble the full puzzle of many of the contributions, not only by organizations and units, but by individuals also.
Some of those notable individuals include Corporal Edward Ward, the Army Aeronautical Division's first enlisted man. Corporal Vernon Burge, our first enlisted pilot. He received his wings in 1912. Private Frederick Libby shot down 24 aircraft in World War I, more than Captain Eddie Rickenbacker. And in his footsteps followed hundreds of sergeant pilots who flew virtually every aircraft we had in World War II.
There is no single volume or book or series of books which contain the history of the enlisted contributions in the development of air power. We had to go into different segments of history and hope to glean a small pearl of wisdom. And with that pearl, we would then examine the different aspects of it and see if it led someplace. This is really not a proliferation of old material, but rather new and unique material that has, in many cases, never been heard about before. The Wall of Achievers is one of our most exciting exhibits. Here we have a broad wall of names and faces of individuals who once wore stripes and held AFSCs, and these are household names and faces, not only in the civilian community, but also within the military. A very interesting artifact which we have here is the tail gun assembly of a B-52D Delta model, and it's a great tribute and salute to the enlisted gunners, the only enlisted crew position on those bombers.
Change to departure, wind come clear for takeoff, traffic 7 miles, final signal, 60, retire, clear for takeoff.
Whether it's movies, exhibits, or memorabilia that interest you, Heritage Hall has something for every Air Force member. And if you're not careful, you just might learn something new.
Coin's challenge was actually conceived in Southeast Asia when some team members took to carrying personal bullets that they would challenge one another to see if they had them on their person. When the bullets became of ridiculous size, we decided we needed to change to coins. The Order of the Sword is an ancient enlisted tradition which was found by King Gustav of Sweden back in the 13th century. It is an opportunity for the enlisted force to recognize its most outstanding leaders who have contributed most to the welfare of the enlisted force.
While packing over 80 years of history in one building is tough, summing up the strength of the enlisted force in one word is easy. People. People whose stories of unselfish sacrifice are told here.
I feel when people come to the prisoner of war display, they gain a new sense of appreciation of what our men experienced over there in Southeast Asia. They've heard many stories by, unfortunately, some people of our society who have said they were not being mistreated. The cell poignantly demonstrates the cruel, harsh punishments that our prisoners of war underwent and the lifestyles that they resided in for years and years.
Although several items here were acquired from the Air Force Museum, many others were donated by visitors who saw the opportunity to have a permanent home for their belongings.
We want to get the word out to anybody who knows about Heritage Hall that if you have something, no matter how insignificant you think it may be, that you send it to Heritage Hall so that we can appraise it and be able to preserve it for a period of years. And we're not talking merely 50 or 60 years, but hundreds of years. The visitor comes in, sees this, and I think our visitor walks away feeling a little bit better, not only about himself, but also about the fact that they indeed, whether they be civilian or military, are a part of this Air Force.
Hello, I'm Lou Gossett Jr. Over 70 million people try or use drugs each year, gambling for just a few seconds of high. Using drugs can cost your career and your life. Just say no. I do.
P-51, when you look at it today, it's a pretty airplane. So's a P-38 and so's a P-47. But I'm sort of partial to the 51 because I fought a war in it.
But when it comes to actually shooting an airplane down, it's tremendously exciting, as you can imagine.
These men were young and eager to fight a war that had quickly spread throughout the world. They fought miles above the earth and became two of this country's fighter aces. Of all the aircraft that fought in World War II, they were able to fly the best fighter of the day, the P-51. It was a plane conceived out of aggression and born to counter the growing threat of Hitler's blitzkrieg. The British, in a frantic search for a high-performance fighter, turned to American industry. 186 days after work began, North American aviation had the first Mustang in the air. The driving force behind this project, Dutch Kindleberger and Lee Atwood.
These two brilliant people were largely responsible for creating the Mustang, and to be involved in guys that had that influence on history and that influence on greatness is a real honor. And they did it, and they took a big gamble because their corporate life, so to speak, was at stake in making sure that airplane was a success. It's nice to know those kind of guys.
The P-51 Mustang, with its killing potential, has brought new hope to a besieged Britain. The flying creatures radiate fear to all enemy pilots and are successfully disrupting their ground transportation system.
When the Mustang came on the scene, I think it was needed tremendously. Whenever it got into combat, it had tremendous success. In fact, I think the overall combat average for the Mustang was in the neighborhood of 11 to 1. In other words, 11 aircraft destroyed for every one the Mustangs lost. And that was unprecedented.
By mid-1943, Allied bombers were penetrating deeper and deeper into Europe. The bombers not only had to face flak, but unchallenged hordes of German fighters. In an effort to extend the fighters' range, the P-51 underwent what was perhaps the most significant aircraft modification of the war.
When we put the 85-gallon fuselage tank in, it gave you a longer range, but it also made the airplane very difficult to fly because it moved the center of gravity aft. And you had an airplane that was very unstable, and if you got into a dogfight with a full fuselage tank, then you were in trouble.
And in general, the rules were that you took off on main tanks, switched to that aft fuselage tank, and used it all up before you got in combat. If you forgot to do that, and you went into a dogfight, for example, and an airplane being tail heavy, you could stress it to the point where it would break up. But boy, thank goodness for it, it sure gave us a lot of range.
Okay, boys, we'll start engines at 8:50, take off, 8:58 to 9:06, rendezvous with the big friends, 11:04.
To compensate for the difference in airspeed, the Mustangs raced to rendezvous with the B-17s. The bombers now enjoyed full fighter escort all the way to their targets and back. The brutal Luftwaffe was a constant threat.
I would say the P-51 against the 109 or 190 with equal pilots was a superior airplane. We ran up against some very, very good German pilots who had a tremendous amount of combat experience, whereas we were new to the game. And we found we lost a few pilots, but it took us about 4 months to really start decimating the good German pilots. And we were learning every mission we flew.
You try to look at the aircraft you're going to go against and try to judge what their performances are going to be. And then you look at your own airplane and judge its performance. And then you try to say to yourself, well, I'll only meet the enemy on my grounds. In other words, if he can dive faster, then I'm not going to get into a diving contest with him. The excitement only goes, I got to get rid of that object in the sky. It only comes to your mind that there's a human being if you see the individual in the airplane or if he bails out. But shooting down that object is the primary consideration. Your vision just seems to narrow down to where it's sort of a pinpoint, and nothing else matters. And you're after that, and everything else is out of consideration.
In combat, you put the end result out of your mind and concentrate on what you're doing, because you know if you get killed, hey, there ain't a heck of a lot you can do about it, you know, and it's all over with. So forget about it. You can't control the outcome of a dogfight other than doing what you're doing at that minute the best way you can. That's to survive.
With the bombs dropped and the B-17s heading home, some of the fighters were released to strafe targets of opportunity.
I'd say the P-51 probably shortened the war by at least a year.
I realized that the Mustang was the airplane of the time, and of course it's still the airplane today of World War II.
It's been decades since the Mustang flew a combat mission. Today, this great fighter is a messenger from that long-ago war, a symbol for the spirit of its time, and a reminder to all of us of what it was that made that time so special. The P-51 and its dramatic impact on our history is one of the great examples of how technological improvements can bring combat success.